The stagecoach rattled into Columbus, New Mexico territory, carrying a bride who had never met the man waiting for her at the church. And Sarah Reynolds knew with absolute certainty that this was the worst decision she had ever made in her 22 years of life. The journey from Boston had taken 3 grueling weeks, and every mile had given her more time to second guess the arrangement her father had made before his death. A mail-order marriage to a rancher named Nathan Bryant, a man whose single photograph showed stern eyes beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and whose letters had been polite but utterly impersonal. Her father, dying of consumption, had arranged it all with his old army friend, ensuring his daughter would be provided for. She had agreed in her grief, too numb to protest, but now the reality crashed down upon her like a thunderstorm. The town was smaller than she expected, a dusty collection of wooden buildings huddled together against the vast emptiness of the desert. It was April of 1885, and the spring sun beat down mercilessly as she stepped from the coach, her traveling dress already sticky with perspiration despite the early hour. The driver handed down her 2 trunks, and Sarah stood there, feeling utterly alone in this strange land so far from everything she knew. A young boy approached, perhaps 12 years old, with a gap-toothed smile. "Miss Reynolds, I am to take you to the church. Mr. Bryant is waiting." Sarah's stomach twisted. "Already? I have only just arrived. I thought perhaps I might have time to freshen up to prepare myself." The boy shook his head. "The preacher is only in town today, madam. He rides a circuit, you see. If you do not marry today, it will be another month before he returns." Of course, everything about this arrangement had been rushed, impersonal, and now she was being hurried to the altar without even a moment to catch her breath. Sarah wanted to refuse, to demand time, but what choice did she have? Her father's debts had consumed everything. Her mother's sister in Boston had made it clear that Sarah was no longer welcome after the funeral. This marriage was her only option, and yet every fiber of her being screamed against marrying a complete stranger. The church was a simple wooden structure at the end of the main street, its white paint peeling in the harsh climate. Sarah's legs felt like lead as she walked toward it, the boy carrying one of her trunks behind her. Through the open door, she could see figures waiting inside, backlit by the bright sunlight streaming through the windows. She paused at the threshold, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. A deep breath. Another. Then she stepped inside. The interior was cooler, thank God, and her eyes needed a moment to adjust. The preacher stood at the front, an elderly man with a kind face and silver hair. Beside him stood a tall figure in dark trousers and a clean white shirt, a black vest and a string tie. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out his features more clearly. Nathan Bryant was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that touched his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes, which had looked stern in the photograph, now seemed uncertain as they met hers across the small church. A handful of townspeople sat in the pews, likely curious about the mail-order bride. Sarah felt their eyes on her, judging, assessing. She walked slowly up the aisle, each step feeling like a mile. When she reached the front, Nathan Bryant removed his hat and held it in his hands. Up close, she could see he was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-weathered skin and calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. But he was still a stranger, a complete and utter stranger. The preacher smiled at her warmly. "Miss Reynolds, I presume. Welcome to Columbus. Shall we begin?" The words stuck in Sarah's throat. She looked at Nathan, really looked at him, and saw a man she did not know. A man whose habits, whose temperament, whose very character were mysteries to her. In Boston, even the shortest courtships involved weeks of chaperoned meetings, dances, conversations. She knew girls who had known their husbands for years before marriage. And here she was, expected to pledge her life to someone she had never spoken to. "Miss Reynolds," the preacher prompted gently. Sarah's hands began to tremble. Her breath came short. The walls of the small church seemed to close in around her. "I cannot," she whispered. Nathan's brow furrowed. "Madam," louder now, her voice strengthening with conviction even as it shook with fear, Sarah said, "I cannot marry a stranger." She looked directly at Nathan, needing him to understand. "I know I agreed to this. I know I traveled all this way. But standing here now, about to pledge myself before God to a man I have never met, I cannot do it. I cannot marry a stranger." A murmur ran through the small congregation. The preacher's eyes widened in surprise. Nathan stood very still, his knuckles white where he gripped his hat. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Nathan Bryant did something unexpected. His tense shoulders relaxed slightly, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Then let us get acquainted," he said simply. Sarah blinked. "What?" He gestured to the pews. "Would you sit with me? Talk with me? If you cannot marry a stranger, then we should remedy that." He looked at the preacher. "Reverend Michaels, would you be willing to wait? Give us some time." The elderly preacher's face broke into a warm smile. "Son, I think that is the wisest thing I have heard in a good long while. I have calls to make in town anyway. Shall we say 2 hours?" Nathan nodded. 2 hours. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time she saw real warmth in those dark eyes. "If you will give me that time, Miss Reynolds, I will do my best to be less of a stranger to you." The congregation began to file out, some looking disappointed at the lack of drama, others smiling at the unexpected turn of events. Soon the church was empty save for Nathan and Sarah. He gestured to the front pew, and she sat, spreading her dusty traveling skirts around her. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them, and turned his hat in his hands. "I suppose I should start by saying I am sorry," Nathan began. "This whole arrangement was not my idea initially. Your father and mine served together during the war, and they kept in correspondence over the years. When your father wrote to say he was ill and worried about your future, my father suggested the match. By the time the letters reached me, much had already been discussed." Sarah absorbed this. "You did not wish to marry," he hesitated. "I have been alone for a long time, Miss Reynolds. My parents passed 5 years ago within months of each other. My father left me the ranch, and I have been working it by myself since then. It is a hard life, a lonely life. The idea of a wife, a family, a home that was more than just a place to sleep at night. Yes, I wanted that. But I will confess I did not think much about the woman herself. I thought only of what she would mean to my life, not about what this would mean to hers. That was selfish of me." His honesty surprised her. Sarah had expected defensiveness, perhaps anger at her refusal. Instead, she found contrition and a willingness to acknowledge his own failings. It was a good start. "I am Sarah," she said. "Not Miss Reynolds. If we are to become acquainted, we should use our given names." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Nathan, though most folks call me Nate." "Very well, Nate. Tell me about your ranch. Your letters mentioned cattle, but little else." He relaxed a bit more, settling back against the pew. "It is about 10 miles from town, up in the foothills. Not the biggest spread, but good grazing land and a reliable water source. I run about 500 head of cattle, some horses. The house is stone, built by my father when he first claimed the land. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen. Simple but solid. Do you have help?" "Hired men, 2 regular hands. Miguel and his son Carlos. They have a small house on the property. Good men, hard workers. During roundup I hire on a few extra cowboys, but mostly it is just the 3 of us." Sarah tried to picture it: the house, the land, the cattle. It was so far removed from her life in Boston, where she had lived in a cramped boarding house after her father's business failed, where the streets were crowded with people and the air smelled of coal smoke and the sea. "What about you?" Nate asked. "Your letters said very little about yourself." "Only that your father had passed and you were willing to consider the arrangement." She took a breath, deciding honesty was the best path forward. "My father was a merchant. He had a successful business importing goods, and we lived quite comfortably when I was young. But he made some poor investments, and when the panic of '73 hit, he lost everything. My mother had already passed by then, when I was 16. Father and I moved to a boarding house, and he tried to rebuild, but his health failed. He died owing more than he owned." She looked down at her hands. "I am not a wealthy bride, Nate. I come with nothing but my 2 trunks and my education. I can read and write, do sums, play the piano, though I doubt that is useful here. I can sew adequately, cook simply. I am not trained for ranch life." "But you agreed to come anyway." "I had nowhere else to go. My aunt made it clear I was a burden. I could have sought work as a governess or a teacher, perhaps, but the positions were few and the pay barely enough to live on. Your offer, as strange as it was, seemed like my only real option." She met his eyes. "But I want you to know, Nate Bryant, I am not here just to be kept. I will work, I will learn, I will not be a burden to you if I can help it." Something shifted in his expression, a new respect. "I believe you mean that. I do." They sat in silence for a moment, the church quiet around them. Through the open door, Sarah could hear the sounds of the town, horses whinnying, someone hammering, distant voices. "What do you do for enjoyment?" she asked. "When you are not working the ranch?" He looked surprised by the question. "I do not have much time for enjoyment, to be honest. The ranch keeps me busy from dawn to dusk most days, but I like to read when I can. I have a small collection of books, and I play the harmonica, though not very well." "What do you read?" "Whatever I can get my hands on. The general store gets books sometimes from Santa Fe. I have read some Dickens, some Cooper. Newspapers when they make it out here. What about you? What did you do for enjoyment in Boston?" Sarah thought back to her life before, which seemed like another world now. "I read as well. I loved going to the library. I would walk along the harbor sometimes, watching the ships. There were concerts occasionally, though we could rarely afford tickets after Father lost his business. Mostly I read and sewed and tried to keep house for Father as he grew sicker." It must have been hard, watching him decline. The sympathy in his voice was genuine, and Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "It was. He was all I had left, and by the end he was so worried about what would become of me. I think arranging this marriage gave him peace in his final days. He knew I would not be left alone and destitute." Nate nodded slowly. "My father worried the same about me, I think. He wanted to see me settled before he died, but it happened too fast. Sometimes I wonder if he would approve of the choices I have made with the ranch." "What choices?" "I have been trying to improve the herd, breeding for better stock. It takes money I am not always sure we have to spare. And I have been thinking about expanding, buying the adjacent land if it comes available. It is a risk." Sarah heard the uncertainty in his voice. "You have no one to discuss these things with. No family or close friends. Miguel gives good advice, but he is an employee. It is not the same. My nearest neighbors are the Kellys, and they have their own concerns. I suppose I have been making these decisions alone because I have had to." He looked at her. "I imagine that is part of why the idea of a wife appealed, someone to share the burden with." It was perhaps the most honest thing he had said yet. Not a romantic notion of love and companionship, but the practical reality of frontier life. Sarah could appreciate that honesty, even if it was not the stuff of the romance novels she had secretly loved. "May I ask you something personal?" Sarah ventured. "Of course. Have you ever been in love? Was there someone before?" Nate was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah worried she had overstepped. But then he answered. "There was a girl years ago. Rebecca was her name. We courted for a time before my parents died. But after I inherited the ranch, after I became responsible for everything, she decided she did not want that life. She married a banker in Las Cruces instead." He said it matter-of-factly, but Sarah detected old pain beneath the words. "I am sorry," he shrugged. "It was for the best, probably. If she could not commit to the life, better to find out before marriage than after." "What about you? Any broken hearts left in Boston?" Sarah shook her head. "No. There was a young man once, a clerk in my father's business. He was kind and attentive, and I thought perhaps something might come of it. But when father lost everything, the young man suddenly stopped calling. I learned quickly who my real friends were in those days. Very few. People can be disappointing." "Yes, they can." Another silence fell, but this one was more comfortable. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly, the panic that had gripped her at the altar fading. Nate was not what she had expected. He was quieter, more thoughtful. And he had not been angry at her refusal, had not demanded she go through with the marriage. That spoke well of his character. "What frightens you most about this?" Nate asked suddenly. "About marrying someone you do not know?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "That I will be trapped, that I will find myself tied to someone cruel or unkind or simply incompatible with no way out. Marriage is forever, and the idea of forever with a stranger is terrifying." He nodded. "That is fair. And what frightens me is that I will fail you, that I will not be able to provide enough or protect you or make you even remotely happy, that you will spend your life regretting this choice." The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Sarah's heart. "Then we are both afraid of disappointing each other." "Seems like it." Sarah looked around the simple church, then back at Nate. "I should tell you something. I am not a fragile woman, despite how I may have seemed at the altar. I am stronger than I look. I survived my mother's death, my father's ruin and death, and a journey across the country alone. I can survive ranch life if you are willing to teach me, but I need honesty between us. I need to know that you will not hide things from me or treat me as a delicate ornament. I need to be a partner, not just a possession." Nate met her gaze steadily. "I can promise you that. I do not want an ornament. I want someone who will stand beside me, who will share this life truly. If you are willing to learn, I am willing to teach, and I will expect you to teach me as well. I am not refined, Sarah. My manners are rough, my education basic, but I am honest, and I will work hard to make sure you never regret coming here." It was not a declaration of love. But it was something perhaps more valuable at this moment, a declaration of intent, of respect, of partnership. Sarah felt some of the tightness in her chest ease. "Tell me about the town," she said. "Who are the people I will be meeting?" Nate settled into the topic more easily. "Columbus is small, maybe 200 people. The general store is run by Horace and Martha Peterson. They are good folks, fair in their dealings. There is a saloon, the Silver Spur, run by a man named Jack Delaney. The blacksmith is Tom Riley. Dr. Francis makes rounds through the territory, but he is based here maybe 1 week a month. The school teacher is Miss Emily Carter, though she is getting on in years, and I hear she wants to retire. The hotel is run by a widow, Mrs. Chen, who came over from China with her husband to work the railroads. He died in an accident, but she stayed and built a good business." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "That seems like quite a diverse community." "The frontier tends to be that way. People from all over, all trying to make something of themselves. There are some tensions, of course. Some of the old-timers do not like the changes, do not like newcomers. but mostly folks are too busy trying to survive to worry over much about where someone came from. And your hands, Miguel and Carlos. Where are they from? Mexico originally. They came north looking for work about 3 years ago. Miguel is one of the best cattlemen I have ever known, and Carlos is learning fast. They are part of the ranch family as far as I am concerned. Sarah heard the firmness in his voice and approved. I look forward to meeting them. Nate glanced toward the door. We have been talking for maybe an hour. Would you like to walk a bit? I could show you the town such as it is. Sarah stood, brushing dust from her skirts. I would like that. They stepped out into the bright sunshine, and Sarah put up a hand to shade her eyes. The heat was intense, far different from Boston's climate. Nate noticed her discomfort and guided her to the shaded side of the street. As they walked, he pointed out the various establishments. The general store was well stocked, a welcome sight after weeks of travel rations. The hotel looked clean and inviting. Even the saloon, which Sarah eyed warily, seemed relatively respectable from the outside. Several people called greetings to Nate as they passed, and he introduced Sarah each time. She saw curiosity in their eyes, but also friendliness. Mrs. Peterson, a plump woman with rosy cheeks, came out of the general store specifically to meet her. So you are the bride from Boston. Welcome, my dear. If you need anything at all, you come see me. I know how overwhelming this can all be. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. That is very kind. The older woman patted her hand. And you call me Martha, dear. We do not stand much on formality out here. As they continued their walk, Sarah felt some of her anxiety continue to ease. The town was small and rough compared to Boston, but the people seemed genuine. This could be a home, she thought. Perhaps not immediately, but in time. They reached the end of the main street, where the buildings gave way to open desert stretching to distant mountains. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way, the sky so wide and blue it seemed to go on forever. What do you think? Nate asked quietly. It is very different from what I am used to, Sarah admitted. But it has a certain beauty. It will take adjustment. Everything worth having takes adjustment. She looked at him. Is that wisdom from experience, from stubbing my toes on reality more times than I can count? Sarah found herself smiling, actually smiling for the first time since arriving. That is an honest answer at least. They turned and began walking back toward the church. Sarah's mind was working through everything they had discussed, everything she had learned. Nathan Bryant was not the stranger he had been an hour ago. He was still largely unknown, but the edges of his character were beginning to show. He was honest, hardworking, lonely. He had been hurt before and was wary because of it. He valued practical partnership over romantic fantasy. These were things she could work with. May I ask what you are thinking? Nate said. Sarah decided to match his honesty with her own. I am thinking that you are not what I expected. I expected someone harder, perhaps, more demanding. Someone who would be angry that I refused at the altar. Would it help to know I was terrified when I saw you walk into that church? She looked at him in surprise. You were. Absolutely. I kept thinking, what if she takes one look at me and runs back to the stagecoach? What if she hates the ranch? What if I cannot make her happy? When you said you could not marry a stranger, part of me was relieved because it meant maybe you felt the same fear I did. This admission, this vulnerability, meant more to Sarah than any flowery declaration could have. I did feel that fear. I still do if I am honest. But maybe slightly less than an hour ago. Maybe slightly less, she conceded. They reached the church to find Reverend Michaels sitting on the steps, reading a small Bible. He looked up as they approached and got to his feet. Well, have you become better acquainted? Sarah and Nate exchanged a glance. Sarah took a breath. May I ask for one more thing before we decide? Of course, Nate said. She looked at the Reverend. "Would you be willing to perform the ceremony with one change? Instead of the traditional vows, could we write our own? I want to promise things I actually understand and believe in." Reverend Michaels looked intrigued. "That is highly unusual, but I do not see why not. What did you have in mind?" Sarah turned to Nate. "I want us to promise honesty, partnership, and respect. I want us to promise to learn about each other and to try, truly try, to build something good together." "But I cannot promise to love, honor, and obey someone I barely know. That feels like a lie." Nate was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I can agree to that. Honesty, partnership, and respect. A promise to try. That feels more real than words I would be saying by rote." The Reverend smiled. "In my years of marrying couples, I have learned that the ones who think carefully about their vows often have the strongest marriages." "Very well. Let us return inside, and you can speak your promises to each other." They entered the church again, and this time Sarah did not feel the panic. She still felt nervous, still uncertain about the future, but it was a manageable uncertainty. She was making a choice with more information now, more understanding. The Reverend took his place at the front. Sarah and Nate stood facing each other. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting in the sun, a small scar on his chin, the way his dark eyes were flecked with amber. He was a real person, flawed and human, and somehow that made this easier. "Nathan Bryant," Reverend Michaels began, "do you take this woman to be your wife? Do you promise to treat her with honesty, to partner with her in building your life together, and to give her the respect she deserves as your equal?" Nate looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "I do. I promise all of that before God and my own conscience." "Sarah Reynolds, do you take this man to be your husband? Do you promise to treat him with honesty, to partner with him in building your life together, and to give him the respect he deserves as your equal?" Sarah's voice was steady. "I do. I promise all of that." "You both promise to try in good faith to build a marriage based on these principles?" "I do," they said in unison. Reverend Michaels beamed. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may seal this promise with a kiss." Nate hesitated, clearly uncertain. Sarah felt the same uncertainty. Their first kiss, and it was to be here now in this church in front of the Reverend. But it was part of the ceremony, and so she stepped closer. Nate leaned down slightly and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and brief. It was awkward and sweet at the same time, and when they parted, Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "Congratulations," the Reverend said warmly. "May you both find happiness together." They signed the marriage register, their names looking strange next to each other on the page. Sarah Reynolds became Sarah Bryant with a few pen strokes, her old life officially ending and a new one beginning. As they left the church, Nate offered his arm and Sarah took it. The gesture felt formal but also steadying. They were married now. The commitment was made. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "I should collect your trunks and get them loaded on the wagon," Nate said. "It is a 2-hour drive to the ranch. We should leave soon if we want to arrive before dark." Reality set in. She would be going to his ranch, to his home that would now be her home. Tonight she would sleep under a roof with this man she had just married. The thought sent a flutter of nervousness through her stomach. Nate seemed to sense her thoughts. "I will give you the bedroom. I can sleep in the main room for now, until you are more comfortable." The consideration touched her. "Thank you." They retrieved her trunks from where the boy had left them near the hotel. Nate loaded them into a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses. He helped Sarah up onto the bench seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they drove out of Columbus, Sarah looked back at the small town, her last connection to civilization. Then she turned forward, toward the open land ahead, toward the mountains in the distance, toward the unknown future. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves. The land stretched out around them, vast and empty, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted tree. Sarah had never seen so much open space. "Does it ever feel too big?" she asked. "Too empty," Nate considered. "Sometimes. Especially in the winter when the wind howls and you cannot see anything but white. But mostly I like the space. In the war, we were always cramped together, too many men in too small a space. This feels like freedom to me." "You were in the war. You must have been very young." "Joined up at 16, lied about my age. My father did not speak to me for a year after, but by the time he forgave me, it was already done. I served 3 years, mostly in the cavalry, saw things no one should have to see." He said it simply, but Sarah heard the weight behind the words. "My father did not speak much about his service," Sarah said, "but he had nightmares sometimes. I would hear him calling out in the night. The war did not end when the fighting stopped, not for a lot of us." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a companionable one. Sarah found herself studying the landscape, trying to imagine living here. It was so different from the crowded streets of Boston, the constant noise and activity. Here everything was still and quiet, the only movement the occasional bird or the flutter of a dust devil in the distance. After about an hour, Nate pointed ahead. "That is the ranch." Sarah looked and saw a cluster of buildings nestled against the foothills. As they drew closer, she could make out a solid stone house with a pitched roof, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals with horses and cattle. It was larger than she had expected, more established. A man came out of the barn as they approached, shading his eyes against the sun. He was perhaps in his 40s, with weathered brown skin and a kind face. Behind him came a younger man, clearly his son, tall and lean with the same kind eyes. "Miguel Carlos," Nate called as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "This is Sarah. We are married as of this afternoon." Miguel swept off his hat and smiled warmly. "Senora Bryant, welcome. We are very happy to have you here." Carlos echoed his father's greeting, his English heavily accented but clear. Sarah smiled at them both, immediately liking their open friendliness. "I am very pleased to meet you both. Nate has told me you are essential to the ranch." Miguel laughed. "He is kind to say so. Come, let us help with your things." The men unloaded the trunks while Nate helped Sarah down from the wagon. He led her to the house, opening the door to reveal a main room that was larger than she expected. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a sturdy wooden table and chairs nearby. Simple furniture, handmade but well-crafted, filled the space. It was clean and organized if sparse. "The bedroom is through there," Nate said, pointing to a door on the right. "The kitchen is through there. It is not much, but it is home." Sarah walked to the bedroom door and looked inside. A large bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, a washstand, a window looking out toward the mountains. It was plain but clean, and the late afternoon sun streaming through the window made it feel warm. "It is a good home," she said, and meant it. She had lived in far worse after her father's business failed. Miguel and Carlos brought in the trunks, setting them carefully in the bedroom. Miguel hesitated at the door. "Senora, I took the liberty of having my wife Rosa prepare some food for your first night. She will come tomorrow to meet you properly, but tonight you should not have to worry about cooking." "That is incredibly thoughtful. Thank you, Miguel." After the men left, Sarah found herself alone in the house with Nate. The reality of it hit her fully. They were married. This was her home now. This man was her husband. It was overwhelming and strange and more than a little frightening. Nate cleared his throat. "I should show you around properly. The kitchen has a good stove, a pantry, a root cellar." The well is behind the house, good clean water. The privy is out back as well. There is a small garden plot if you want to plant one. Rosa keeps chickens, and she has agreed to share the eggs until you get your own flock established if you want one. Sarah followed him as he showed her around, trying to take in all the information. The house was well maintained, everything in its place. She had expected bachelor disorder, but Nate clearly kept things neat. In the kitchen, she found the meal Rosa had prepared. A pot of stew keeping warm on the stove and fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Her stomach growled, reminding her she had barely eaten all day. "We should eat," Nate said. "It has been a long day." They sat at the table and Sarah served the stew into bowls. It smelled delicious, rich with meat and vegetables. They ate in silence for a while, both exhausted by the day's events. Finally, Nate spoke. "I know this is strange. I know we are strangers in many ways still, but I want you to know, Sarah, I am glad you came. I am glad you gave me a chance." Sarah looked at him across the table. "I am glad too. I was so frightened this morning, but now, sitting here, it feels less frightening. Still uncertain, but less frightening. We will learn as we go. That is all anyone can do." After dinner, Nate showed her how to work the stove, where he kept supplies, the routines of the house. Sarah paid close attention, determined to master her new environment. She had meant what she said about not being a burden. As darkness fell, Nate lit the lanterns, casting a warm glow through the house. Sarah found herself yawning despite her best efforts. "You should rest," Nate said. "You have traveled far and it has been an emotional day." Sarah nodded. "What about you? Where will you sleep?" "I have blankets. The sofa is comfortable enough. I have slept in worse places." She wanted to protest, to say he should not be displaced from his own bed, but the truth was she was grateful for the space. She needed time to adjust, to feel safe. "Thank you, Nate, for understanding, for being patient." He gave her a small smile. "We made promises today. I intend to keep them." Sarah retired to the bedroom and closed the door. She opened one of her trunks and pulled out her nightgown, changing quickly. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the quilt soft. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind, the creak of the house settling. She was married. She was in New Mexico territory. She was beginning a new life with a man she barely knew. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Sarah closed her eyes and said a prayer for strength, for wisdom, for the courage to face whatever came next. In the main room, Nate lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling. He had a wife now, a partner if they could make it work. Sarah was different from what he had expected. She was stronger, more forthright. She had challenged him at the altar, demanded better than a marriage between strangers. He respected that courage even as it had terrified him in the moment. He thought about Rebecca, how she had left when ranch life became too real. Would Sarah do the same? Or would she stay and learn and build something with him? Only time would tell. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and men's voices outside. She dressed quickly in a simple calico dress, one of the few she owned that was practical rather than fashionable. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Nate already up, coffee brewing on the stove. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I did not wake you." "Not at all. What time is it?" "About 6. We start early on a ranch. There is coffee and I can make some eggs if you are hungry." "Let me do it," Sarah said. "I need to learn my way around the kitchen." Nate showed her where everything was, and Sarah set about making breakfast. It was a simple meal, eggs and bread with butter, but she felt a small sense of accomplishment at managing it in the unfamiliar kitchen. As they ate, Nate outlined the day. "I need to ride out with Miguel and Carlos to check the herd in the north pasture. We have had reports of a mountain lion in the area, and I want to make sure we have not lost any cattle. Rosa will come by this morning to meet you. She can show you more of how things work around here, answer any questions you have. Will you be gone long? Most of the day, probably. Will you be all right here alone? Sarah squared her shoulders. Of course. I am not helpless, Nate, he smiled. No, I am beginning to understand that you are not. After breakfast, Nate left with Miguel and Carlos. Sarah watched from the doorway as the three men rode out, their figures growing smaller against the vast landscape. Then she turned back to the house and took stock. The place was clean but sparse. She could make it more comfortable, more like a home. Her trunks held linens and small treasures she had brought from Boston. She set about unpacking, finding places for her things. An embroidered tablecloth for the table, curtains for the bedroom window, a small framed photograph of her parents for the dresser. A knock at the door interrupted her work. Sarah opened it to find a woman perhaps in her late 30s, with a warm smile and eyes that crinkled at the corners. Senora Bryant, I am Rosa. Miguel is my husband. Please call me Sarah. Come in. Rosa entered, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. I brought some things from my kitchen. I thought we could cook together today, and I can show you how we do things here. It is very different from the East, I think. Sarah was grateful for the help and the company. As they worked together in the kitchen, Rosa explained the rhythms of ranch life. The men worked from dawn to dusk most days. Meals needed to be hearty and substantial. Water was precious and should not be wasted. The garden would need to be tended carefully in the hot, dry climate. Chickens were relatively easy to keep and provided both eggs and meat. You are very kind to help me, Sarah said as they kneaded bread dough together. Rosa shrugged. We help each other here. That is how we survive. I remember when I first came to this land. I was very young, newly married to Miguel, and I knew nothing. Other women helped me, and now I help you. That is the way. Where are you from originally? A small village in Chihuahua. Miguel and I married very young, too young some said, but we have been happy. We have 3 children. Carlos you met. We also have 2 daughters. Maria is 16 and works at the hotel in town. Lucia is 13 and helps me at home. I would love to meet them. You will very soon. We live just over that rise. Rosa pointed out the window. Close enough to help, far enough for privacy. It is a good arrangement. As they worked, Sarah felt herself relaxing. Rosa was easy to talk to, full of practical advice and gentle humor. By the time the bread was baking and a stew was simmering for dinner, Sarah felt she had gained not just knowledge but a friend. May I ask you something personal? Sarah ventured as they sat with coffee. Of course. How long did it take you to feel truly comfortable with Miguel? To feel like his wife rather than a stranger sharing a house? Rosa considered. For me, it was not so difficult because we had known each other from childhood, but I will tell you what my mother told me before I married. She said marriage is not one moment of falling in love. It is 1,000 small moments of choosing each other, of learning each other, of building together. Some days are easy and full of joy. Some days are hard and you wonder why you married at all. But if you keep choosing each other, keep trying, the love comes. It grows like a garden slowly if you tend it well. That is wise advice. My mother was a wise woman. I miss her very much. Rosa patted Sarah's hand. Give yourself time. Give Nate time. He is a good man, Sarah. Lonely, I think, and perhaps a bit lost since his parents died. But good and honest. You could have done much worse. Sarah thought about this after Rosa left. Marriage as a garden, something that grew with time and care. She could work with that idea. It made the enormousness of what she had done feel more manageable. Nate returned as the sun was setting, dusty and tired. His face lit up when he smelled the food cooking. Something smells incredible. Rosa helped me today. She taught me a great deal. Rosa is worth her weight in gold. Miguel is lucky to have her. They ate dinner together, and Nate told her about the day. They had found signs of the mountain lion but no dead cattle. They had moved some of the herd to a different pasture with better grass. A fence needed mending. It was the ordinary business of ranching, but Sarah found herself interested, asking questions, learning. After dinner, as they cleaned up together, Nate said, "You did not have to do all this. The cooking and such. We could have managed with simpler meals until you found your feet." "I want to contribute, Nate. This is my home now, too. I need to feel useful," he nodded. "I understand that, but do not push yourself too hard. There is time to learn everything." That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she reflected on her first full day as a married woman, as a rancher's wife. It had been surprisingly good. She had learned much, accomplished much, and perhaps most importantly, she had felt less like a stranger in her own life. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Sarah rose early with Nate, made breakfast, and sent him off to work. She spent her days learning from Rosa, tending the small garden they planted together, caring for the chickens Rosa helped her acquire. She sewed curtains for the windows, repaired Nate's worn shirts, cleaned and organized the house. In the evenings, Nate would return, and they would eat dinner together and talk. Slowly, gradually, the conversations became easier, more natural. They began to learn each other's habits, preferences, quirks. Nate liked his coffee strong and his eggs over easy. Sarah preferred tea when she could get it and took her eggs scrambled. Nate was an early riser by nature. Sarah was more of a night owl but adjusted to the ranch schedule. Small intimacies began to develop. Nate would touch Sarah's shoulder as he passed. Sarah would pour his coffee without asking. They began to move around each other in the kitchen like a dance, learning each other's patterns. 2 weeks after the wedding, Sarah woke to find Nate sitting at the table, looking troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked, alarmed. "We need to go into town today. There is a problem at the bank regarding the ranch mortgage. I need to meet with the banker, and I thought perhaps you would like to come, see town properly, maybe visit with Martha at the store." "Of course. I will get ready." As they drove into Columbus, Sarah sensed Nate's tension. "How serious is this problem?" He hesitated, then remembered his promise of honesty. "The payment is due next week, and I am short. I had expected better prices at the last cattle sale, but the market was down. I have enough to make most of the payment, but I am about $200 short." "What happens if you cannot pay?" "The bank could foreclose. Take the ranch." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Can you borrow the money? I am already in debt. No one will lend me more." They rode in heavy silence. Sarah's mind raced. $200. It might as well be 2,000 for all she had access to. But there had to be something they could do. At the bank, Sarah waited while Nate met with the banker, a stern-faced man named Silas Worthington. She could hear raised voices through the closed door, though she could not make out words. When Nate emerged, his face was set in hard lines. "He will give me 1 month extension, but no more. If I cannot pay by then, he will start foreclosure proceedings." Sarah took his arm. "Then we have a month to find a solution. We will figure it out, Nate." "How?" "I have been over the numbers 100 times. There is no way to get that kind of money in a month." Sarah's mind was working. "Tell me everything about the ranch finances. Maybe a fresh pair of eyes will see something you have missed." They went to the hotel and took a quiet corner of the dining room. Over coffee, Nate laid out the situation in detail. The ranch was profitable, but barely. Feed costs were high. The cattle market was depressed. He had invested in breeding stock, which was a good long-term choice, but tied up capital now. As Sarah listened, an idea began to form. "What about the horses? You have several beyond what you need for the ranch work. Could you sell some? The horses are not worth much." Maybe $50 for the lot. What about that mare you mentioned, the one you bred to the neighbor's stallion? You said her foals were exceptional. Lucy. Her colt is too young to sell. He is only 4 months old. But someone might pay a premium for him as a future prospect, especially if the bloodlines are good. Nate considered this. Tom Kelly has been asking about Lucy's foals. He might be interested. But even if he pays well, it is not enough. Sarah thought some more. What about taking on work outside the ranch? Could you hire out to other ranchers for a few weeks? I could, but that means leaving the ranch unattended, and Miguel cannot manage everything alone. What if Miguel focuses on the essential work and I help? I am learning, Nate. I could do some of the lighter tasks. He looked at her doubtfully. Sarah, ranch work is hard, dangerous sometimes. Then teach me to be careful. Teach me what I need to know. We are partners, remember? That means we face problems together. Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he had deliberately initiated such contact. You are something else, Sarah Bryant. You know that, she squeezed his hand. So I have been told. Now let us make a plan. They spent the next hour working through possibilities. Nate would approach Tom Kelly about the colt. He would ask around about short-term work with other ranchers. Sarah would talk to Martha about selling eggs and vegetables, anything to bring in a bit more income. They would cut expenses everywhere they could. It was not much of a plan, Sarah knew, but it was something. It was taking action rather than sitting helplessly waiting for disaster. As they prepared to leave town, Martha called to Sarah from the store. A moment, dear. Sarah joined her, and Martha spoke quietly. I heard through the walls, I am afraid. Banks and hotels share a building. I know about Nate's troubles. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Martha continued, I want to help. I have been wanting to carry more fresh goods in the store, eggs and vegetables and such. If you can provide them regularly, I will pay fair prices. It will not solve everything, but every bit helps. Sarah wanted to hug the kind woman. Thank you, Martha. That means more than you know. As they drove back to the ranch, Sarah told Nate about Martha's offer. She saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. People are kind here, she said. Different from Boston in many ways, but kind. It is a good community. I would hate to lose the ranch, not just for myself, but because it would mean leaving here. Sarah realized with a start that she would hate to leave too. In just 2 weeks, this place had begun to feel like home. The vast sky, the quiet land, the simple rhythms of the days. She had started to care about the ranch, about making this life work. Over the following days, they threw themselves into the plan. Nate went to see Tom Kelly, who agreed to buy the colt for $60, a fair price. He found work helping a neighboring ranch with their roundup, hard labor that would keep him away for 10 days but would pay $100. Miguel assured him they could manage the ranch in his absence. Sarah increased the garden's production, rising even earlier to tend it in the cool morning hours. She gathered eggs daily, and twice a week Nate took them into town to sell to Martha. She made butter from the cow's milk and sold that too. It was exhausting work, but Sarah felt a fierce satisfaction in it. The night before Nate left for the roundup job, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah had brought out 2 cups of coffee and they sat in companionable silence. I will worry about you while I am gone, Nate said finally. I will be fine. Miguel and Rosa are close if I need anything. Still, a lot can happen on a ranch. Promise me you will be careful. I promise. And you promise me the same. Roundup is dangerous work, he nodded. Sarah, I want to thank you for not giving up when things got hard, for standing with me through this. You did not have to. You could have demanded I send you back east. Sarah looked at him in surprise. Why would I do that? I made promises, Nate. I intend to keep them. Still, you have been more than I had any right to hope for. Something warm bloomed in Sarah's chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Affection, respect, partnership. The garden Rosa had spoken of, starting to grow. On impulse, Sarah reached over and took Nate's hand. His fingers were calloused and strong, and they closed around hers gently. They sat that way as the sun set, hands intertwined, neither speaking, both drawing comfort from the connection. The 10 days Nate was gone passed slowly. Sarah missed him, she realized with some surprise. She missed his quiet presence, his dry humor, the way he listened when she spoke. The house felt empty without him. She threw herself into work to distract herself. The garden flourished under her care. The chickens laid prolifically. She even helped Miguel with some of the easier ranch tasks, learning to handle the horses, to check the cattle for illness, to mend fences. Rosa came by often, and Sarah was grateful for the company. She met Rosa's daughters, Maria and Lucia, and found them delightful. Maria was clever and ambitious, saving her wages from the hotel to eventually open her own business. Lucia was shy but kind, with a gift for working with animals. When Nate finally returned, dusty and exhausted but with money in his pocket, Sarah felt her heart lift at the sight of him. He dismounted stiffly, clearly sore from long days in the saddle. "Let me help you," Sarah said, taking his horse's reins. She had learned enough to unsaddle the animal and rub him down, tasks that would have been impossible for her a month ago. Nate watched her work with approval. "You have learned a lot. I have had good teachers." Inside, Sarah had a meal waiting and Nate ate with obvious appreciation. As they cleaned up together, he tallied their progress. "With what I earned, the colt sale, and what you have brought in from your sales, we are still about $50 short." Sarah's heart sank. They had worked so hard and it still was not enough. But Nate continued, "However, Miguel told me today that he has been saving money for years, and he would like to loan us the remainder. He considers the ranch as much his home as ours, and he does not want to see it lost." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. That is incredibly generous. "Miguel is family as far as I am concerned. I told him we would pay him back with interest as soon as we are able, and he agreed." Nate took Sarah's hands. "We are going to make it, Sarah. We are going to save the ranch." The relief was overwhelming. Sarah felt her knees go weak and Nate caught her, pulling her into an embrace. It was the first time they had held each other, and Sarah leaned into his solid warmth, letting herself feel the safety of his arms. "We did it together," she said into his chest. "Partners." She felt him nod. "Partners." They stood that way for a long moment, holding each other, and Sarah felt something shift between them. They were becoming more than partners. They were becoming companions, friends, perhaps even something more. That night, Nate did not sleep on the sofa. Instead, at Sarah's invitation, he joined her in the bedroom. They lay side by side in the darkness, not touching but aware of each other. "Sarah," Nate said quietly, "yes, I am starting to care for you. More than I expected. I want you to know that." Sarah's heart hammered. "I am starting to care for you too. I do not want to rush you. I know we agreed to take time, but I needed to say it." Sarah rolled onto her side to face him, though she could barely see him in the dark. "I am glad you did. And Nate, I think I am ready to be a proper wife." "If you are ready for a proper marriage," she heard his breath catch. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." He reached for her in the darkness, his hand finding her face, gently cupping her cheek. "I will be careful with you, gentle." "I know." What followed was tender and awkward and sweet. They were both nervous, both uncertain, but they moved together with care and patience. It was not the passionate encounter of romance novels, but it was real and honest and somehow perfect for them. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Nate's arm around Sarah, her head on his chest. That was nice, Sarah said and then laughed. That sounded ridiculous. I meant it was good, better than good. She felt Nate's chest shake with quiet laughter. I knew what you meant, and yes, it was. Sarah felt something settle inside her, a rightness she had not expected. This marriage, which had started so strangely, was becoming real. She was becoming a true wife, and Nate was becoming a true husband. The next morning, Sarah woke to find Nate watching her, propped up on one elbow. "Good morning," she said sleepily. "Good morning, wife." The way he said it, with warmth and affection, made Sarah smile. "Good morning, husband." They made the payment to the bank that week, handing over the hard-earned money to Silas Worthington. The banker counted it carefully and stamped their receipt. "I confess I did not think you would manage it, Bryant. Well done." Walking out of the bank, Nate took Sarah's hand openly, not caring who saw. "We did it. The ranch is safe." "For now," Sarah said practically. "We need to make sure we are never this close to the edge again." "Agreed." "I have been thinking about that. We should diversify, not rely so heavily on the cattle market. Maybe more horses, as you suggested. Your egg and vegetable business is profitable. We could expand that." Sarah liked that he was consulting her, treating her as a true partner in the business. "I think we should also build up some savings, even if it means living more frugally. We need a buffer for emergencies." "Smart. See, this is why I needed you. You think about things differently than I do." They spent the afternoon in town, celebrating their success modestly with a meal at the hotel restaurant. Mrs. Chen served them personally, her smile warm. "I heard about your trouble, and I am glad you found a solution. This town needs good people like you." As they drove home that evening, Sarah felt a contentment she had not experienced in years. She had a home, a purpose, a partner she was growing to love. Yes, love. She could admit it now, at least to herself. She was falling in love with Nathan Bryant. The summer months passed in hard work and growing closeness. Sarah's confidence in ranch life grew daily. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle. She could shoot a rifle, though not expertly, well enough to protect the chickens from predators. She became skilled at the household tasks that kept the ranch running. But more than the practical skills, she and Nate grew closer emotionally. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for the future. They laughed together at small absurdities. They worked side by side in companionable silence. They made love with increasing confidence and tenderness. One evening in August, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Nate said, "I love you, Sarah." The words hung in the air, perfect and simple. Sarah turned to look at him. "I love you too, Nate. I have for a while now, I think. I just was not sure when to say it." He smiled, that slow smile she had come to adore. "I am glad we are both sure now." He kissed her under the vast starry sky, and Sarah felt the last of her reservations melt away. This was her life now, this man, this place, and she would not trade it for anything. In September, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. The realization brought a mix of excitement and fear. She waited another week to be certain, then told Rosa, who confirmed what Sarah suspected. "You are with child, I think." "How wonderful!" Sarah's emotions were complicated. She was happy, yes, but also frightened. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here far from doctors, and bringing a child into their still precarious financial situation seemed daunting. That evening, she told Nate, they were cleaning up after dinner, a domestic scene that had become routine. "Nate, I need to tell you something." He heard the seriousness in her tone and put down the dish he was drying. "What is it?" "I am almost certain I am with child." Nate's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, joy, worry, then settling on cautious happiness. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it." "Rosa agrees." He crossed to her and took her hands. How do you feel about it? Sarah appreciated that he asked. Happy, frightened, uncertain, all at once. Me too. He pulled her into an embrace. But we will figure it out just like we figured out the bank payment. Together. Together, Sarah agreed. They wrote to Dr. Francis, who confirmed the pregnancy when he made his rounds the following week. Sarah was healthy, he assured them, and should do well if she took reasonable precautions. The baby would come in late April or early May. As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, Nate became increasingly protective. He tried to prevent her from doing any heavy work, which sometimes frustrated Sarah but also touched her. She could see his fear that something would happen to her or the baby. I am not made of glass, she told him one day after he insisted she not lift a full water bucket. I know. But I cannot lose you, Sarah. You are everything to me now. The sincerity in his voice melted her frustration. You will not lose me. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine. Promise me. I promise to be careful and sensible. That is all I can promise. Rosa was invaluable during this time, sharing her experience and knowledge. She taught Sarah what to expect, how to prepare, what would be needed when the time came. Maria and Lucia helped Sarah sew baby clothes, tiny gowns and blankets. The whole ranch seemed to come alive with anticipation. Miguel built a beautiful cradle from wood he had been saving. Carlos carved a set of wooden toys. Even the town joined in, with Martha organizing the women to create a collection of baby necessities. Sarah was overwhelmed by the kindness, the sense of community. This was so different from Boston, where neighbors often barely knew each other. Here, people cared, people helped. It was a good place to raise a child. Winter came, and Sarah grew larger. The baby moved vigorously, which both alarmed and delighted her. Nate would place his hand on her belly in the evenings, marveling at the sensation of their child moving beneath his palm. Boy or girl, do you think? He would ask. I do not know. Does it matter? Not at all, as long as you are both healthy. They had long conversations about names, about how they would raise the child, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. Nate wanted to be present and involved, not distant like his own father had been. Sarah wanted to raise a child who was strong and independent, capable of facing the world. In March, when Sarah was very large and uncomfortable, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. A woman stepped down from the stagecoach in town asking for directions to the Bryant ranch. Nate was in Columbus that day and encountered her. Nathan Bryant, the woman asked. Nate nodded warily. Yes, I am Rebecca Stanton. Well, I was Rebecca Gaines. We knew each other years ago. Nate felt his stomach drop. Rebecca, the woman who had rejected ranch life, who had married the banker instead. What are you doing here? My husband passed away 6 months ago. I heard you were married now, and I wanted to congratulate you, and perhaps to apologize. This was the last thing Nate had expected. Apologize for how I treated you. I was young and foolish, and I did not appreciate what you were offering. I chose money and comfort over real partnership, and I regret it. Nate studied her. She looked older, worn in a way that had nothing to do with years. There was sadness in her eyes. I am sorry for your loss, Rebecca, but I do not understand why you have come all this way to tell me this. She looked down. I heard your wife was expecting, and I thought perhaps you might need help. I am alone now, and I thought maybe I could be useful. Nate understood then. She was looking for a place to belong, perhaps hoping to rekindle something that had long since died. He felt pity for her, but nothing more. Rebecca, I appreciate the gesture, but Sarah and I are managing fine. I am sorry for your situation, truly. But whatever was between us is long past. I love my wife. I have built a life here. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I know, I just thought perhaps. But no, you are right. I should not have come. I wish you happiness, Nate. I truly do." He watched her walk away, returning to the stagecoach depot. A part of him felt sad for her, but mostly he just felt grateful for what he had. Sarah, the baby coming, the ranch. Real love, not the immature infatuation he had felt for Rebecca years ago. He did not tell Sarah about the encounter immediately. But that evening, as they sat together, he said, "Someone from my past came to town today." "Oh, Rebecca, the woman I told you about. Her husband died and she came here, I think looking to see if there was still something between us." Sarah felt a flicker of jealousy but pushed it aside. "And is there? God, no. I felt nothing but pity for her. Sarah, whatever I felt for her was nothing compared to what I feel for you. You are my wife, my partner, my love. I need you to know that." Sarah took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly where their child moved beneath his palm. "I know that, Nate. I trust you completely." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, as if to prove his point. Sarah responded with equal fervor, and they ended the evening tangled together in their bed, their connection stronger than ever. April arrived with warming temperatures and Sarah's increasing discomfort. She was ready for the pregnancy to be over, ready to meet their child, ready to have her body back to herself. On a warm evening in late April, as Sarah was helping Rosa prepare dinner, she felt a sudden gush of water between her legs. She looked down in shock. "Rosa, I think something just happened." Rosa took one look and smiled. "Your water has broken. The baby is coming. Carlos," she called. "Ride fast and get your father and Señor Nate from the north pasture. Tell them the baby comes. Then go to town for the doctor." Carlos took off at a run. Rosa guided Sarah to the bedroom and helped her change into a nightgown. "The pains will start soon. We will get through this together." Sarah felt the first contraction about 20 minutes later, a tightening across her belly that took her breath. Rosa timed them, noting they were still far apart. Nate burst into the house an hour later, his face pale. "Sarah, I am here. The baby is coming, but Rosa says it will be hours yet." He came to the bedroom, taking her hand. "I am here. I will not leave you." "You should not be in here for the birth," Rosa said. "That is women's work. I promised Sarah I would be present in my child's life from the very beginning. That includes the birth. Unless Sarah wants me to leave." Sarah gripped his hand through another contraction. "Stay. Please stay." So Nate stayed, holding Sarah's hand through the long hours of labor. Rosa directed and supported, her experience invaluable. Maria arrived to help, and eventually Dr. Francis made it from town. The labor was long and hard. Sarah had never experienced such pain, but every time she thought she could not continue, Nate's presence steadied her. He whispered encouragement, wiped her face with cool cloths, never left her side. Finally, as the sun was rising on a new day after 20 hours of labor, Sarah gave one final push and their baby entered the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," Dr. Francis announced. "A healthy, strong boy." He placed the baby on Sarah's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was screaming his displeasure at being born. Sarah felt tears stream down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Nate was crying too, she realized. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, and the infant's fingers curled around his father's, gripping tight. "He is perfect," Nate said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, you are amazing. He is perfect." After the doctor and Rosa had finished their work, after Sarah was cleaned and comfortable and the baby was swaddled, they were finally left alone as a family. Nate sat carefully on the edge of the bed, unable to stop staring at his son. "What should we name him?" Sarah asked. "We discussed so many names but never decided." Nate thought, "What about William, after your father?" Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears again. "You would do that. Your father made this possible by bringing us together. It seems fitting. William Bryant. Yes, I love that. William Nathan Bryant, using your name as well. William Nathan Bryant, Nate repeated. Perfect. They spent the day marveling at their son, taking turns holding him, learning his tiny features. Sarah fed him with Rosa's patient instruction, finding it awkward at first but gradually getting the hang of it. Miguel and Carlos came to meet the baby, their faces full of joy. Martha and several of the town women came by with food and gifts. The ranch felt like it was celebrating, and Sarah realized with wonder that this was what family felt like. Not just her, Nate and William, but this whole community that had embraced them. That night, with William sleeping in his beautiful cradle beside their bed, Sarah and Nate lay together in the darkness. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "For what?" "For being patient with me. For not being angry when I could not marry a stranger at that altar. For suggesting we get acquainted instead. For becoming someone I could love." Nate kissed her forehead. "Thank you for giving me a chance. For seeing past your fear to what we could become together. For giving me a family. We built this together. We did. And we will keep building it." Sarah thought about that first day, how frightened she had been, how impossible it all had seemed. And now here she was, lying in bed with a man she loved deeply, with their newborn son sleeping peacefully nearby, in a home they had made together through hard work and honesty and commitment. It had not been easy. There had been challenges and fears and moments of doubt, but they had faced everything together as partners, and they had built something beautiful. "I love you, Nate," she said sleepily. "I love you too, Sarah, more than I knew it was possible to love someone." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. William grew from a tiny infant into a sturdy toddler and then a curious little boy. When he was 3, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, a beautiful baby with Sarah's auburn hair and Nate's dark eyes. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Nate's breeding program for horses proved successful, bringing in good money. Sarah's egg and vegetable business expanded, with Martha now carrying a whole section of goods from the Bryant Ranch in her store. They saved carefully, building up the buffer they had learned was essential. Miguel and Rosa remained part of the ranch family, with Carlos eventually becoming a full partner in the operation. Maria opened her boarding house in town and became quite successful. Lucia married a young rancher from a neighboring county, and Sarah attended the wedding with genuine joy. When William was 5 and Catherine was 2, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the fall, she delivered another son whom they named James. 3 children, a busy household, a thriving ranch. Their lives were full and rich. The children grew up wild and free in the best sense, learning the ranch life from an early age. William was a natural with horses, showing his father's gift. Catherine was quieter but brilliant, teaching herself to read before she started school. James was adventurous and fearless, always getting into some mischief or another. Sarah sometimes thought back to that girl on the stagecoach, terrified and alone, arriving in a strange land to marry a stranger. She could barely recognize that frightened woman in who she had become. Sarah Bryant was strong, capable, confident. She could shoot, ride, rope cattle when needed. She managed the household finances with a keen eye. She was respected in town and throughout the territory, but more than any practical skills, she had gained something more precious. She had gained love, genuine and deep. She and Nate had built a partnership that was the foundation of everything else in their lives. They still talked for hours, still laughed together, still desired each other. The passion had not faded with time and children, but had evolved into something richer. One evening, when William was 12, Catherine 9, and James 7, the family sat around the dinner table together. It was a rare moment when everyone was present, and no one was rushing off to some task or another. "Papa," William said, "Tom Kelly said his parents had an arranged marriage." "Is that true?" Sarah and Nate exchanged a glance, smiling. "Your mother and I had an arranged marriage of sorts," Nate said. "We had never met when we were betrothed." Catherine's eyes went wide. "You had never met, but you love each other so much." "We do now," Sarah said. "But your father and I were strangers when I arrived in Columbus." "So what happened?" James asked. "How did you go from strangers to married?" Nate looked at Sarah with such love that even after all these years, it made her heart skip. "Your mother did something very brave. She stood at the altar and said she could not marry a stranger, and I suggested we get acquainted first. We spent 2 hours talking in the church, and then we decided to take a chance on each other." "And it worked out?" William asked. Sarah reached across the table and took Nate's hand. "It took time and work and patience. But yes, it worked out better than I ever could have imagined." "So you can fall in love after you get married?" Catherine asked. "Sometimes," Sarah said, "if both people are willing to try, willing to be honest and patient with each other. Your father and I chose to build our love intentionally, like building a house brick by brick." The children digested this, and the conversation moved on to other topics. But later, after the children were in bed, Sarah and Nate sat on the porch as they often did, watching the stars. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not come?" Nate asked. "If you had stayed in Boston or found some other solution," Sarah considered. "Sometimes, but I cannot imagine a life better than this one. Yes, it was terrifying at first. Yes, there have been hard moments. But Nate, you and these children, this life we have built, it is more than I ever dreamed of having." "Even when I am a stubborn fool," she laughed. "Even then, what about you? Any regrets?" "None. Not a single one. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Bryant. You and our children and this life we have made together. When I think about how close I came to losing it all because I was too proud to admit I needed help with that bank payment, it terrifies me. But we did not lose it. We saved it together. That is what we do. We face things together." Nate pulled her close and they sat watching the stars wheel overhead, the sounds of the night settling around them. The cattle lowing softly, the horses whinnying, the distant call of a coyote. The sounds of home. Years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. They lost Miguel to a sudden heart failure when he was 62, a loss that devastated the whole ranch family. But Rosa remained, and eventually her grandson came to work the ranch, continuing the family connection. The children grew and eventually began making their own lives. William married a girl from town and they built a house on the ranch property, continuing the work. Catherine, brilliant Catherine, became a teacher and eventually opened a school in Columbus, educating the children of the territory. James, their adventurous youngest, became a territorial marshal, riding the circuit keeping the peace. Sarah and Nate grew older together, their hair graying, their hands more gnarled with age and work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, a love built on decades of partnership and choosing each other every day. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party at the ranch. The house Sarah and Nate had made together was full of noise and laughter. 3 generations gathered to celebrate. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Sarah and Nate walked out to the porch one more time, moving slowly now but still together. 30 years, Sarah marveled. From strangers at an altar to this. The best 30 years of my life, Nate said. Though I have to say, my favorite day was the one where you refused to marry me. Sarah laughed, the sound rich and full. Your favorite day was the day I said no. It was the day we both decided to do things right, to build something real. Everything good in my life came from that decision, from your courage to demand better than a marriage between strangers. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the cool night air. I am glad I came to New Mexico territory all those years ago. I am glad your father and mine arranged that marriage. But most of all, I am glad you said, then let us get acquainted. So am I, my love. So am I. They stood together under the vast starry sky. Two people who had been strangers once, who had built a life and a love through honesty, partnership, and the simple act of choosing each other every single day. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed to their children and grandchildren. The house would still stand. The land would still stretch to the mountains. But more than any physical legacy, they had built something intangible and beautiful. Proof that love could grow in unexpected soil, that strangers could become soulmates, that courage and honesty could transform fear into joy. Sarah Reynolds had stepped off that stagecoach 30 years ago, terrified and alone. But Sarah Bryant stood here now, fulfilled and surrounded by love, living a life richer than any she could have imagined in those early frightened days. She had said she could not marry a stranger, and Nate had replied that they should get acquainted. It was the best conversation of her life, the beginning of everything good that had followed. As they finally went inside, arms around each other, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For Nate, for their children and grandchildren, for the life they had built together. For the courage to demand better, and for the man who had been wise enough to agree. It was, she thought as Nate helped her into bed with the gentle care he had always shown her, a very good life indeed. The best life. Their life, built together from nothing but hope and honesty and the willingness to try, and it had all started with a refusal at the altar and a cowboy's simple suggestion. Then let us get acquainted. The end.